Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Msingi Talks. Msingi Talks is a monthly conversation hosted by Msingi Trust, where we make the connections between faith, justice, and advocacy. Today, I'm very, very excited because I am hosting some amazing friends, comrades, amazing people who've done so much for this country, who continue to fight for this country in different ways, who continue to defend the most vulnerable in various ways. And I will ask them to introduce themselves, say who they are, what they do. I intentionally did not ask for their bio so that they give their bios to us. Yeah. So we'll start with Mshai.
Oh dear. Good evening, everybody. I was hoping you would start with everybody else but me, but I'm still happy to be here. My name is Mshai Mwangola. I like to describe myself as an oratorist, which simply means that I think about how we make knowledge and how we share knowledge using every way possible: written text, storytelling, what we hear, what we see, the whole mix of it. And maybe we'll come back to this when we talk about what it means for us to have Madaraka. So yeah, I'm a performance scholar, so I'm an academic. And again, performance means how we make meaning. So I'm really, really interested in how we as Kenyans make meaning. But I guess most important of all, I am Kenyan. And that is the identity that I wear very proudly. Also, I'm proud to be an East African, but I'm proud that I have chosen as well as been born into the identity of Kenyan.
Asante, karibu Mshai. I remember at another forum, you and Abubakar Zain ensured that we knew the East African anthem. So I know you you are proudly East African.
And many other things.
And many other things, yes. So thank you for honoring this invitation. I'll go to Abubakar.
Good evening, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be with you today. As you've been told, my name is Abubakar Zain. I'm an East African of Kenyan origin, but also a storyteller. So I brand myself as a storyteller. I know Mshai talked about being a scholar. I am mtu wa mkono wa kutengeneza story. So I've had a great privilege in this country to contribute to different processes. But as you can tell, Shai and myself are from Orature Collective, where we are very concerned about how to complete the circle between the past, present, and future. And we try very much to say that if we understand our past, the lessons that we will have will continue to allow us to fashion a present and a future that will be better for all our people than it was before. Thank you.
Thank you, Abubakar. Can I ask, just ask one more question about some of the processes that you contributed to, so that we get an understanding of some of them?
Okay, so when I was at the university, by the way, Orature Collective brings together people who went to university at the same time. I went to university at the time when we were involved in the struggle against the one-party dictatorship. So what started with some of the processes I was involved in at the university are two. I can mention two which I think are important for this conversation. One, we were mentored and learned from great souls and great mentors who people like Mumbi wa Maina wa Kenyatta's wife. When he was in jail, she adopted us and we adopted her. People like the late Professor Imbuga and other people who are involved in the struggle in one way or another, particularly in the thinking about where we were as a nation at that time. but I was also a student leader. I was a secretary general and then chair of the what was called the Creative and Performing Arts Center, where most of us did our performances, including free traveling theater. And of course, we were involved in student activism as part of the demand for the reintroduction of multi-party politics. Later on, I was involved in some cultural work. We set up the Nairobi Theatre Academy, but also I was involved in cultural activism in terms of demanding for constitutional reform. So I became a member of the People's Commission in Fungamano, but I was also a member of the Constitution of Kenya Review Commission, what people call the Guy Commission. But I can also mention that I was able to serve East Africans in Arusha as a member of the East African Legislative Assembly, among other things. So I don't know if that is sufficient.
That's sufficient. We seem to have Asante Sana. Thank you. And I keep saying Asante for serving us in the way that you have. We have lost Njoki, but maybe as we wait for her to come back as she introduces herself, I'd like to play an introduction video to who Msingi is, so that it also helps us understand why we are having this conversation as a form of introduction to who I am. I am Carol Nganga. I am the founder of Msingi Trust. And the reason I founded Msingi Trust was to make the connections between worlds that I love, the world of faith, activism, social justice, and advocacy. So let me play this video as a form of introduction to Msingi.
What does social justice, activism, advocacy, and the Christian faith have in common? Is pursuing activism, advocacy, and the Christian faith have in common? Is pursuing justice at all levels a spiritual discipline? How do we influence church leaders and Christians to advocate for justice and fight injustice? How can churches become the first line of defense for the socially unprotected? Msingi is a movement of people spurred by their Christian faith to answer these questions about social justice, advocacy, and activism. Msingi believes the church can be empowered to redemptively advocate for justice for the most oppressed, for those relegated to the fringes of society, for the disempowered, and those without access to power. In his inaugural sermon, Jesus spoke about those on the margins of society, about their freedom and their liberation. Pursuing justice is at the core of being a Jesus follower. Justice and righteousness is the foundation of God's throne. Msingi's name, call, heart, and bold mission draws from this, holding true to the tenets of God's kingdom. Our faith propels us to seek justice and spend ourselves on behalf of the poor. Justice is their shield and defender. At Msingi, we are about connecting the struggles that we all face. We are creating safe spaces to converse about social justice, curating content that enhances justice conversations, and in this way, uniting the stand for social justice and for advocacy. Engage the content, join in the conversations, connect to the movement. This is Msingi.
So, karibuni to the conversation. Njoki will join us in she's here. And as she does, I will wait for her to do the introduction so that then we all go together. Njoki, are you here?
Yes, I am. Really, really sorry about that. I don't know who's trying to sabotage me.
We will refuse the sabotage. Karibu.
Ashindwe kabisa.
Are you able to put on video?
My video is on.
Yeah, I can see her.
You can see her.
I don't know why I can't see her. Oh, there you go. So Njoki, I can see you now. Could you please introduce yourself? The amazing self that you are.
Unapenda kuchocha watu sana. So my name is Njoki. My name is Njoki Gashanja, a community organizer in Githurai, coordinator Githurai Social Justice Center, patriot, daughter of Kenya, very, very passionate about social justice, about equity, about good governance, and also a student of law at the University of Nairobi.
Awesome. Thank you, Njoki. And maybe we could start with you as you're here. So the reason I wanted us to have this conversation from Msingi Talks was it's very easy for us to be talking about this month, this Madaraka month, and not knowing why it's important. And a quick Google search of what Madaraka Day is that Madaraka Day is a national holiday celebrated every 1st June of every year in the Republic of Kenya. It commemorates the day in 1963 that Kenya attained internal self-rule after being a British colony since 1920. Madaraka is a Swahili word for authority, ruling power. And so I want to go before 1963. I also want to go before 1920. Who were we before colonial rule? Who were we?
It's interesting that you started with me because I am clearly the youngest here. So clearly I was not there in 1920. But really, and I mean, even when we're talking about who we were and what we are taught in school, a total, a total misrepresentation of what our history is and what our identity is. We were a people that thrived in in communities, in Ubuntu, and in clans, and working together. We were a people that had our own culture, our own spirituality, and functional in all the communities that existed at that particular time, before the introduction of common law and the British coming to colonize us. So we were a people who really thrived in oneness, in family, in community, doing things in a communal way, and we might not have identified, like we do as a nation right now, the Kenya that we know right now, and I identify as nationalists, but in our little ways, in our little communities, we really thrived in working together and thriving in Ubuntu.
Thank you, Njoki. Zane, who were we before the 1920s? What was life like before that? Yeah.
I think Njoki has spoken well about the context, but I would just like to add that there are 3 imperatives that you need to deal with as far as who are we. We were part of communities. On the first imperative, we were part of communities. We were part of civilizations. Some of the Kenyan communities had links with the Nubian and the Egyptian civilizations. Down south, they had connections with other civilizations. but there were civilizations in the East African community area, or the Eastern Africa. And there were civilizations, there were communities, and this imperative goes contrary to what the Western education teaches people, that we were nothing before they came here. So there was great civilizations before the coming of Wazungus or white people. The second imperative, of course, for me, let me back up before I finish with the first imperative. We also had contacts and trade links, commercial links with other civilizations, all the way to China, to Cambodia, Vietnam, to the Far East, to Venice in Europe. So we had connections within Africa and outside Africa. So we were not a contained people. We were participants on global scale. But the second one is in terms of just running forward in terms of the conversation and make it short. The day of mourning, of weeping and wailing, 1498, when the Portuguese arrived in this part. And in 1498, they arrived in the southern part of Africa and came all the way to what we call Kenya today. And they landed in Mombasa, and that was the introduction of two fundamental imperatives that has haunted us to date. One is our introduction to this concept of shock and awe. You know that when people talk about shock and awe, they think it's a very recent phenomena. And this shock and awe basically was, they bombarded Mombasa for no particular good reason. They bombarded Mombasa badly, attacked Mombasa for, attacking people who you don't know, just simply because they have refused to become your slaves. So and the reason why they attacked Mombasa was they were asked, what did you do in Kilimani? Kilimani is the southern part of South Africa. In the Portuguese records, you'll find Kilimani being referred to as Keleman. Okay. And then they went to Malindi, where they were welcomed. And that story goes on. I think last week, the Portuguese embassy was trying to celebrate that day of arriving in Mombasa and Malindi, but they didn't talk about Mombasa a great deal because they left Mombasa in ruins. But the third imperative is, of course, related to this one, is the introduction of what was called the doctrine of discovery. And I think young people need to Google this term, doctrine of discovery. The doctrine of discovery became the organizational philosophical principle for empire, for slavery, for exploitation, for all that was related with colonialism later. So in a sense, you'll find very many stories among all our communities about where they came from, why they arrived where they are now, what were some of the things that they encountered in their journey, and so on. Only to add as a last point, this memory is deliberately erased in our records. It's deliberately erased from our records for three reasons, in my humble opinion. The first one is that it makes us human. You see, the colonial philosophy is coached on that we were nothing before they came. But this is a counter narrative that we had great achievements before they came. So that's the first one. The second one is that there are certain organizational principles in society that they brought, but replaced them with what we had, what Njoki is talking about, Hutu, Ubuntu, and so on. Do you know that before they came, there were no jails in Kenya or any African country? The first jail in Kenya was Fort Jesus. So Fort Jesus was not only a fort, but it was also a jail. Okay. And then the third imperative is that because if we cannot know what our past was and our achievements in the past, we can't imagine a different path from the one that they created for us. So this idea that we can imagine an alternative way of organizing society is something that they are very afraid of, because it will challenge the status quo, but it will also challenge certain assumptions about who benefited from them and why we are the way we are now. I hope that surfaces for now.
Oh, that's rich. You've taken us all the way back to the 1400s. Mshai, is there anything on that story of origin of who we were before we were named, before we were titled? Is there something that you would like to add to that?
Not so much add. I think I just want to emphasize, and I'm really happy that Njoki started with that sense of, she gave us the word Ubuntu, that sense of us being human beings, that the sense of our humanity. And I think sometimes when you look at the rest of the story, when you have other people coming in and questioning that humanity and saying, you need this, or that whole sense of who we were then was we were human beings. And that Utu from that time is what we are still trying to make sure that it gives us our central place of identity. I think the other thing I'd like to add is just this phrase that was coming to my mind as I was listening to both Abubakar and Njoki, was this word wananchi, which I keep going back to more and more, because it gives me that sense of a people rooted in a space, in an environment. And I think that's really important. That's who we were. We were rooted here. And anybody who came at whatever point that they came, those who came from outside, made a choice either to stay or to say, you know what, I'll come and visit, but I'll take what I find here and take it elsewhere. And I think who we are as Kenyans are the people who chose to stay and who chose to be rooted, or whose circumstances tied in with this land in such a way that we have nowhere else to go. Even if we go elsewhere, we're always thinking of home is here. I think the third thing that was emphasized was this sense of being in relationship with each other, so that we had several nations and several identities. And those I think are something that we still tussle with, that we have this, we're told we're Kenyans, so we have this identity that's supposed to supersede all these other identities. But some of those identities are older than that. Some of those civilizations are older than that. And because this is a conversation anchored in faith, we must also say that we were people of faith even before 1920 or 1498, or whoever was here were people of faith as well. So I just wanted to add that, and because I think those elements will keep coming into the conversation as we go.
Thank you, Mshai. And I want now for you to take us from 1920 to 1963 in 2 minutes. I don't know how you'll do that. Who are we between 1920 to 1963? And what's happening in those years?
Okay, so I think the way that I would do that, and I'm sure the others will add on to this, is that we've talked about what there was before. We had a territory, the space that we call Kenya today. We had land, but then we also then had people who are already there. In 1920, what happens is that legally, okay, we have the imposition of an outside state onto this space, who decides we've drawn boundaries, which happened, in Berlin, Scramble for Africa, all that story. And many people who are in this space actually do not have a sense of connection to each other. I love the way Benedict Anderson talks about a nation as an imagined community. So we did not imagine each other. My ancestors were sitting in Taita. They did not imagine that they were in the same nation space as people who are maybe in Mombasa or in Pokot or in Busia, those places that today we own. In 1920, boundaries are drawn, a state is imposed that says you are all now British subjects, yes, but we know, and the other subjects elsewhere, but you are all now under this space called Kenya. So that territory is established and a state, a legal entity, is put over us. And then we have what somebody called the short century. Between 1920 and 1963 is this negotiation between the people who were there and the Wananchi I talked about, who owned this place as their home, and this externally imposed state. Until in 1963, you have a change that happens. And in 1963, two things that happen, and I know we'll talk about this, Madaraka, the people who are in the space, the Wananchi, are told, okay, guys, you can govern yourselves. We're going to allow you to rule yourselves, but still under the state, that the external state that is in Britain. And then in December of the same year, again, they're told, okay, you can now have your own state. So legally, Kenya becomes an independent country. And we often talk about Jamhuri, but let's remember that a year before Jamhuri, which happened in 1964, we become a legal state with our own government, but the head of state remains externally imposed on us. And then in 1964, we cut those ties and we say now even the head of state is one of us. Now, the question to what it means in terms of one of us, I think is what we've been tussling it with since then.
Yeah. Njoki, between 1920 to 1963, there is there's a lot of hustle and bustle. There's external wars, but also there's internal wars. Internal wars where people are, what's that English word? They are wanakata, this imposition of this foreign rule, because I think the one thing we tend to forget is that people refused the colonialists. So what was going on in terms of struggle at that end during those years?
When I talk about that epoch, I really imagine a lot of confusion, and panic, because now there's this imposition, there's this foreigner who's coming to tell us what we believed, what we've lived, what we were was barbaric, was uncivilized, and now they want to introduce a whole new identity to who we were as a people. And every single time we're talking about the struggle and the Mau Mau, the resistance, even the story as it's told is very, it alienates the different resistance and groups that people were putting in different places. You would think it's only the Mau Mau who actually fought for this independence that we talk about. So 1920 to 1963 is a time where people come together and say we need to hang together or be hanged separately. It's people trying to fight, for the lands that they owned, and people were coming to take what they had. It's Kenyans, as now we had been given that identity, talking amongst themselves, communities, others, opting to collaborate for survival, others putting up the resistance. So I see when I talk about that period of time, I see a lot of confusion, I see a lot of panic, I see a lot of coming together to now re-strategize and see how we put up a united front to bring down this, this foreigner who's coming to take our land, because you see, even the very first, attempts to resist were because of the lands that the lands that people owned, the resettling that was happening, people being resettled to places that lands that were unproductive, people being forced to slavery, So that must have been a very confusing time, and a time to, reckon. We come together, or we get hanged separately.
Asante Njoki. It was time of peril, as you say. Abu Bakr, maybe to weave into this conversation about what the time was, I'm wondering, what freedoms did we have before then? What freedoms did we have? What Madarakas did we have before? Did we have or not have during those time periods between from the 1400s to now? We are now at 1963. What freedoms did we have?
Thank you very much. But before I answer that, let me just add a voice in terms of context of what happens between that 1920 and 1963. And I'll just give you highlights. One, it is important to remember that the conceptualization of the entity that becomes Kenya in 1963 is there are three separate, distinct entities. There is the colony, there is what is called the protectorate, and what was called the Northern Frontier District. And these were separate entities, and they were treated differently. If you talk about the colony was a settler colony. Again, that's another distinction. There were two types of colonies, generally speaking. A colony and a settler colony. A settler colony was the kind of colony where the colonizer was not planning to live. They were not planning to live at all. So the equivalent of a settler colony is New Zealand, Australia, Canada, Zimbabwe, Algeria, South Africa, where one of the distinct decolonization methodology applied in these colonies because of necessity is violence. You can only decolonize settler colonies through an armed struggle. And that partly explains the armed struggle in Kenya. Secondly, that also explains the tensions that exist even today between the former colony, the former NFD, and the former protectorate. Secondly, the Second World War created an opportunity for Kenyans to go and fight, but also learn fighting skills. But even more importantly, get in touch with other Africans. One of the best accounting of this process and how profound it was on those who went to fight is the struggle for freedom and justice by Bildad Kagia. The story was completed with the contribution of the son and the editor. And Bildad Kagia talks about encountering Egyptians. And Egyptians at that time were much way ahead in the struggle for their independence than us. Encountering Indians, people from the Malay region who are ahead, but also West Africans. So this nuance of comparing notes of the strategies that are used by colonial forces becomes an important process of building a sense of belonging wider than just Kenya, and making connection with other liberation movements across the globe. So this was important, but also the British, if we talk about British colonial rule, during this period, they had promised India that if you help in the war effort, you'll gain your independence. So as soon as the war ends, the Indians now are demanding and say, now fulfill your promise, you know. So it is not by chance that India became one of the first British colonies to be independent. And whatever template was then developed there became a template that was used for the decolonization process in all other British territories. And of course, we can talk about the impact of this war and economies to European countries. And also, more importantly, people think that the Lancaster talks were designed for Kenya. They started with India. India started that kind of conference and negotiation. But what was altered in the template in India was, you know, in the end, they had to partition India between India and Pakistan. And that partitioning process was very traumatic. It is said that more than 1 million people were killed in that partitioning process. So one of the things that the British embraced and said, they would never allow for partitioning of countries. So that partly explains to you what they did in Ghana, what they did in Nigeria, and what they did in Kenya. No matter what evidence you brought and say these are 3 distinct regions that they can't work together, or Nigeria, the northern part and the southern part, and the western part needs to be considered differently, or Cameroon, the British Cameroon in quotes and the French Cameroon in quotes, and how the British were willing even to give that area to the French speaking so that there is no partitioning. And you know what kind of complications that has created in Cameroon today. And there's so much violence in Cameroon because of that. So it informed a template of what they were doing. Last point. The last point I wanted to make is that by the time you come to 1963, people are now contemplating and say, what do we do with our past? Don't forget this colonialism was very violent. It's a violent process. It is a filthy, violent process. And millions of people are killed in this empire building and colonial process. In fact, there is a lot of thinking now that we should declare slavery crime against humanity. We should declare colonialism crime against humanity. So people are now looking and saying, what do we do with this history? But connected to this last point, the British had started preparing themselves for leaving. So that if you look all the way from India, coming all the way to Africa and the former Malay and so on, they had started preparing those who they thought will continue respecting them and doing their bidding in creating an elite that is trained in thinking like the British, and that they will embrace British values and will continue with the colonial state in another form. So I'd like to stop there.
Oh, wow. Asante Abubakar, I think you leave us at a place you've left us hanging, because you've told us that now they've prepared people like them, but not them. So to continue the legacy of colonialism. And I keep asking, so what happens, and maybe one of you can answer this, what happens, Mshai, now I've pointed out, look at me deciding who it is. What happens at 1960 when they've 1963, 1964, so are you telling us that our leaders that we got were not the ones who had been prepared by the British Is that what we are saying? To continue the colonization process and project?
So what I'm going to do is just literally pick up, I think, from where Baka left us. And I think just to say something about the question you asked in terms of what were the freedoms that were available. The colonial state, because it is a colonial state, the logic of a colonial state is always extractive. It takes out of the territory, right? The settler state has its own people, it's brought in its own people. And I just want to go back to that, because when you asked about the freedoms, the colonial state therefore then introduces a hierarchy of people. At the top level are the settlers and the colonial officers. Colonial officers, of course, are here to serve, and then they'll go back home. The settlers will remain there, but they don't really become, as I said, wananchi, because their focus is still out. And it is about extracting wealth. They don't really see themselves in that space unless they reorganize it totally, which is why actually before 1963, you have no such thing as a Kenyan. The people who are here are British subjects living in a colony or a protectorate or a territory called Kenya. Now in between, then you have the natives. The natives are the people they consider to be non-human. So in terms of rights, in terms of responsibilities, the idea was that the native, they're not civilized enough to be given rights and responsibilities. The settlers are the ones who have been civilized. So you can give them the full rights. And that is why, even though there are few of them, they have such a great say. In between, you have the people who are immigrants. And these are people who are considered as not belonging to that territory initially. They were not indigenous, they were not wananchi. And so they're expected to want to serve the settlers. They're never quite up there with the same kind of responsibilities and rights, but they're not down at the level of the natives. And you will find legally in the colony and and also in the protectorate and the territory, people who are Indian, for example, the Somali, Arabs, they were seen as this in-between space. Now, the question you have asked is what happens in 1963? I don't know if you saw this article John Kamau wrote over, I think it was last Sunday, and he was talking about Harry Thuku. And one line that really caught my attention was he talked about how when Harry Thuku came out of detention, came out back very rich, there were all sorts of rumors, has this guy sold out, what happened to him? And he said he spent a lot of time doing the paperwork to legally make himself a settler. Right? So these were Africans. There was a way that a native could show that they had become civilized enough and that the mind had changed enough that they were seeing mother country to be that one out there, the colonial country, and not this one here where they were living. And in 1963, when the British realized, okay, this settler colony, we're not going to be able to hold on to. So what's plan B? Plan B is that we allow them to have self-rule. We tell them, okay, if even they want, in December, they can even be an independent country, but we retain control of the economy, of the politics, of the things that really matter. And this is why the head of state remained the queen. And even after our head of state changed, a big number of those who are considered, they're considered more civilized. How did you become more civilized? You went to a school, you became Christianized, you had a Christian name, you came back prioritizing English, you changed the way you lived, and you lived like, quote, a white man, became Zungu. In other words, you showed that I can be a settler. And the more people showed themselves to think of that extractive state as still being the model, the more likely they were to be given the instruments of the state. And you will see, like right across a lot of the colonies, as the imperial powers found themselves in a space where they had to hand over. Britain in particular, France as well, looked for the people whom they could keep connected to them. If they couldn't do it if they couldn't do it in terms of real politics, so a country like Kenya becomes independent and then it becomes a republic, it then finds ways of keeping those ties in terms of economics. It finds ways of giving them perks and privileges. And that is why Kenya, for the large part, became one of those states where that happened.
Thank you, Mushai. I feel like we've gone to school for the past 45 minutes. You guys have really helped us to chronicle who we were in before the 1963, where we now became a country, quote unquote, became a people. Njoki, want to ask you, what is your Kenyan story and what does Madaraka mean for you? And that all of us will answer that question. What is your Kenyan story and what does Madaraka mean for you?
Sorry, I was on mute. I mean, just before I answer that question, when you ask what happens in 1963, what happens in 1963 is actually deception, is a betrayal. It's a level in a game of trying to change the colonialist from white to someone who looks like you. A coaching of the chicken to look like a duck. So really, the neo-colonialism is very real even in our present, our present day Kenya. So when you ask what is my Kenyan story and the Madaraka story, really, when you were reading, the description that is on Google saying it's the self-rule, that's a lie. It's a deception because internal rule, self-rule. To whose interest are we serving? We Oginga Odinga said, when he was writing his book, Not Yet Huru, there was that euphoria, we've gained independence, now we have the self-rule. And then really quickly, when that euphoria died in 1966, they realized, by the way, apana, we were shortchanged. We really did, we were played. This is a game, and the resistance now starts, the questioning of what is this independence that we're talking about? If even after the self-rule, we're having people being resettled from their lands, we're having people being silenced when they're trying to question those people who actually fought for the land, for the independence, being killed one by one, being eliminated, the betrayal that went on with the stories of Akinadeda and Kimathi, So what is my Madaraka story? It is that replay of betrayal time and time again that has also taken the front stage in our politics today. I do not see I do not see any freedom when we're talking about the class struggles that we're having in our country today. Growing up, in this informal settlements, seeing the gap between the poor and the rich widen every single day. That for me to get education, for me to get healthcare, for me to get dignity, I have to be managed, So the constant class alienation that is happening in our country, we're not yet huru. It was a lie, and especially in our realities that we're living right now, the informal settlements, where there's this deliberate attempt to actually always control the masses that look like would bring resistance, always trying to control the masses that will ask questions using the very same methods Abu Bakr spoke about. Violence. There's extreme violence, especially, in the ghettos, police brutality, the police being used as, as a tool of oppression to oppress the masses, people who are living, in the low income areas, you know, that is the reality that we're living every single day. That for me to be able to walk at 7 p.m. in my hood, I need to have a 50 bob, 100 bob in my pocket, you know. That's the only reason I wear a mask right now in this COVID times in the ghetto is because I am afraid the police officer is gonna try to extort me and make this, you know, a business venture. That a health crisis has been turned into, you know, a security issue with a lot of force and a lot of brutality to, you know, to the citizens. So Shai talked about the disconnect. If we do not know what our past is, there will be that you know, continued disconnect. So right now, when you ask a Kenyan who's 30 years and below, if they would die for their country, they would ask, what is there to die for? You know, because there's been that disconnect in telling our stories of struggle. There's been that disconnect that they do not understand why they should die for, you know, for this country, because they've normalized oppression. They've normalized, there's a lot of fear. The state sells a lot of fear. So when you're talking about freedom, when you're talking about Madaraka, really, I'm at a point where I say this, it's not yet there. We need another, you know, we need to reboot the independence and get the independence of the people.
Thank you, Njoki. Abubakar, what's your Madaraka story?
So again, back to the context. What was negotiated in Lancaster to give us independence as a constitutional framework was a negotiated document that sought to bring together different entities, different communities, and asking people and saying, okay, can we build a nation that will include and make sure that all the people regain their dignity? Underline that word, dignity, human dignity. The whole struggle was about that. But going back a little bit, the technical team of KANU was telling KANU leaders that accept anything, and once you become the masters of the country, again, listen to the language, masters of the country, then you can do anything to that constitution to suit your needs. So if you talk about betrayal, that is one of the big betrayal that was there. Secondly, at 1963, we were very uncomfortable with our past. Any settler community will tell you that one of the imperative is how to make sure that you don't leave that country. But memory becomes an important issue. And what did we do in 1963? We came up with a new philosophy of government and say, forget the past. The past no longer matters. Forget. If I harmed you, you forgive me. If you harmed me, I have forgiven you. And that was one speech. And the chapter of memory of what happened with the violence, with the destruction, forget about that. Okay. Again, a society that seeks to bury its memory will never find peace until they come back to that memory, because there are certain things that we needed to deal with. We were blurring the line between right and wrong. We were blurring the right between those who fought for independence and those who fought to retain a colonial system. Again, something else that we were uncomfortable with, divide and rule. You know, the British used the divide and rule strategy to keep us in check and to lord of us. Yet the new leadership were comfortable with divide and rule. What else did we get it wrong? The whole idea of oppressive laws Do you know that the penal code has remained more or less the same since colonial time?
Mm.
The penal code, the things that Njoki is talking about, owners of this country being treated like third-class citizens that are not deserving of dignity. That's a template of the colonial penal code. You know that Mau Mau was only unbanned in 2002, actually 2003. Can you imagine? It was still a banned organization until 2003. We were so ashamed of our own armed struggle to liberate ourselves. But in the whole of this discussion, there are three important things that we normally don't contextualize. Between 1959 and 1962, there was very serious discussions to delay the independence of any Eastern African country so that we have an opportunity to build an East African Federation. That will partly take care of the artificiality of the boundaries that were created for us. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, our leaders lost that opportunity, okay? But at the heart of that, partly was distrust on Kenya. Because both Tanzania and Uganda were looking at Kenya as a settler colony whose interests they were not sure about. Was it the interests of Africans or was it the interests of the British? And if you read the transaction of meetings around that time, and I'm using the word transaction deliberately because the Kenyan perspective was transactional. Mm-hmm. It was a business. Mm-hmm. We were the settler colony. We had the most advanced infrastructure. We had the most advanced economy. Therefore, we were going to load it over the other countries. And that became a bit of a problem. So again, three things that are important to put in mind, which I'm just paraphrasing what I've said and what Mshai have said and what Njoki has said. There was great euphoria and great optimism at the time of independence. That was very quickly replaced with the betrayal and the alienation. So from very hopeful to very hopeless. Mm-hmm. So we are changing trajectory very quickly. Secondly, the emergency of draconian rules, the British draconian rules, which had not been replaced with accepted governance structures that were changed. So moving away from some of the democratic principles in the independence constitution to a much more draconian settler type constitutional dispensation based on an imperial presidency. And suddenly, it is important to say this, even the more progressive leaders were sold to put these changes in place. But suddenly those changes started biting. And some of them were the first casualties of these excesses, including detention without trial. And then the last point I want to make is that the leadership, no matter how well-intentioned they were, and I think, Caro, it is you of Christian faith who say the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So,
yes.
no matter how well-intentioned some of our leaders were, they led us to a path that undermined the dignity of the human being as much as the colonial one. When they introduced things like detention without trial, single-party dictatorship, gross violations of human rights, it then started a completely new, a new phenomena for now, fighting your own government to return us to the path of, we were hoping that independence will restore our dignity and will heal our people and we'll heal our land. That didn't happen. So we started a new struggle seeking to pursue what was not provided for in 1963 onwards.
Thank you, Abubakar. But you've not you've given us that story, but I'm yet to hear from you what does Madaraka mean for you?
What it meant was personally, you know, I'm an old man, but I was born after independence.
Yes.
and I was also born after the Republic.
Okay.
So again, what this means for me, it is looking back and saying lost opportunity. We had a great opportunity to heal our nation. We didn't take it. We had an opportunity to restore our dignity as a people. We didn't take it. We had an opportunity to institutionalize freedom so that people can pursue their dreams without restrictions. We had an opportunity to move away from white privilege. Instead, a few people wanted to inherit white privilege. Yeah. We had an opportunity to. So for me, it is a story of lost opportunities, but also of betrayal, like the others have talked about, but also of great lesson that we need to teach this in schools. What we are discussing today is not taught in our schools.
That's true.
So it's really lost opportunities.
Yeah. Thank you, because I know I need to go and look up what Northern Frontier is. I had no idea something like that existed. Dr. Mshai, what is your Kenyan story and what does Madaraka mean for you?
First of all, I'm smiling when my brother here said he's an old man, and I'm like, we are age mates. So I'm not sure about this. But I really appreciated what Njoki said when she brought in this aspect of the youth and just this thing of that we are different generations. And I think it's really important to have this as an intra-generational conversation. And I want to come to this because for me, for a long time, and even a lot of the work I've done has been on this question of generation. Not so much, and it's something I get rather, I wouldn't say impatient, but I feel can be counterproductive when it's about generations fighting each other. But I liked the way that Njoki contextualized it and said, this is what the concerns of my generation are because of the life that we are living. So I want to take it from there. And I just want to say one of my life mantras has been Frantz Fanon's challenge. Each generation must, out of relative obscurity, discover its historical mission, fulfill it, or betray it. And when you ask me what my Kenyan story is, my Kenyan story is the story of what Njonjo Muye has called the Uhuru generation. Those of us who were born just after independence, right? So we are almost as old as Kenya, give or take a few years. I have a sister who was actually born in 1963, one of my older sisters, and she's not so much older than me. And I think for me, when I think about what it means to be part of a generation, I also think of Fanon's words that follow immediately when he talks about a historical mission, where he warns us he says, you must rid yourself of the habit of an intra-generational blame game, but instead he encourages us to see it as a relay race. So what do I mean by that? When we were kids, one of the things I remember in the first, I'm sure, just take it roughly, the first 10 years, maybe 15 years of independence, we had a lot about now that we are independent, as Zane said, there will be water for everybody by the year 2000, electricity for everybody by the year 2000, education, health, all these big promises were made. My generation, we had a lot of every Madaraka Day, Jamhuri Day, all those celebrations, they would tell us that people fought so that you guys would inherit this better nation. Everything seemed, the Mau Mau struggle, the trade union struggle, all these struggles, all the way from Meketilili, had happened so that we would live in a space with all these amazing, wonderful things. And then it didn't happen. You know, we grew up and we were like, hiya, where is that water, that health, that education, and all those things? So for me, that's my Kenyan story. It's being a member of that generation and growing up and becoming very disillusioned. You know, by the time you become 21, 22, 25, 30, and you're asking, where are the jobs? Why are there these hierarchies? Why are there these inequalities? And then you begin to realize, so I come at it from a different, perhaps slightly from Abubakar, where I begin to think about what is the responsibility of my generation to fulfill. So back to Fanon, each generation has a historical mission. And I know I don't have time to do this, but we could all the way back, and I've as a storyteller, I've done that, traced that history from the generation of Meketilili. Meketilili, we are told, died in 1920, which is the year the colony, and you know, and that British state takes legal control over this territory. So from that generation to independence, there are two colonial generations. And then we have the generation that we call the Lancaster House, the guys who delivered on these legalities. And I think we all thought that, okay, it's done, we're independent. And then we discovered independence is not enough, right? Madaraka is not enough, Uhuru is not enough, Jamhuri is not enough. And then we realized, as we have said, that these guys, so many of them, especially the ones who controlled power, they didn't want to transform the state. Njoki gave us the word neo-colony. So we moved from the settler colony Abubakar Zain talked about to the neo-colony Njoki has talked about. They didn't want to transform the state. They just wanted to replace the settler and become the ones who sit there. They didn't want to change the kind of hierarchies that existed. So they just wanted to make sure that it is their people, watu wangu, are the ones who are now getting. My area is the one that is being developed. But the others, you know, whether it is on the grounds of class, or it is on the grounds of geography, or it is in the grounds of ethnicity, or it's in the grounds of faith, all those other people we don't care about. So for me, Madaraka means that we must complete that transition from self-rule to responsibility for everybody, not for that small clique. We have to change that structure and that mentality that once sees, you know, my job in life is to become a settler, or the contemporary equivalent of a settler, to saying we must dismantle. That's what self-rule is. You dismantle that colonial framework and you make sure that we have a state that serves everybody. So we have to move from this externally rooted facing state that's extractive and only benefits a small group, to really a state that serves wananchi in their entirety, whether it is in the area of nations, ethnic nations, or faith communities, or classes, or gender, or generation, or people of different abilities. It is our responsibility as a generation to do our part in moving to that level, to deliver, I think, on constitutionalism, because a generation before us have gotten us to the point of a new covenant, which is a new constitution that faces inwards. However, there are people fighting to dismantle that. So I think my Madaraka story is that we must move self-rule to responsibility and constitutionalism.
Shy. I feel like I need a minute to sit in what you've said, because it's also, I feel also a collective call as well for all of us. I think I hope I'm not hearing that wrongly, but we need to do the work, basically.
Yes, and can I say, I'm speaking to my generation. If we don't do our work, it's like a relay race, right? Somebody else gave us the baton. If we don't do the work we need to do, Njoki's generation cannot do the work they're supposed to do, because now they will fight to do the constitutionalism. And that's the point I think Abubakar made. If the generation that did independence completed, after getting that constitution, completed the work and gave us our own constitution and delivered on constitutionalism, then the ones who followed them would not have had to fight for a new constitution. they would not have had to fight from, multi-party. It's like they went back and began fighting the war again. And so we are doing the job that should have been done by the generation ahead of us. So we must deliver on ours so that Njoki's generation will discover their historical mission, which will be rooted in the time, and will be able to deliver it. And then they'll be able to hand the baton over to the generation who are babies now, and who will come and who will tell them, you guys, there's something you did not complete. Now we are going to deliver on that.
Thank you, Mshai. I want to sort of transition this conversation into the power of story and connect. We've been talking about story and framing story. What we've been doing from the beginning is that we've been putting ourselves in a context. But I want to concretize it by asking you, I want to connect two questions. I want to ask Njoki, what is a Kenyan reality story injustice that is close to your heart, that is rarely shared? And how does justice, Madaraka, and power of storytelling interplay to bring to light the injustice or the story or the reality?
Sorry, I missed that last bit. My network is a bit unstable.
No worries. So I said, what is the Kenyan reality story injustice that is close to your heart, that is rarely shared? And how do the concepts of justice, Madaraka, and power of storytelling interplay in that reality?
Great. So I think what is really close to my heart is, again, the violence against the poor. It is actually a crime in this country to be poor, and this fight for dignity, fight for inclusion, is a fight that has been really close to my heart. It is what I wake up every single day to fight and advocate for, and just to connect this to the power of the story. Right now, we're having this thing they're calling the hustler narrative. And it really annoys me that you want to ride on, on a story of the poor to actually, gain milestones, political milestones. When you're saying that you're a hustler and you come to meetings, in a chopper, where when you're saying you're a hustler, and you see this is the importance of us telling our own story, because I am legit hustler, a young youth who's constantly thinking about where is my next meal coming from. The kids are just recently opened school. They've been 2 months in school. They're going to close for 10 days, then resume, after 10 days to a new term. That basically means, mzigo wa school fees. But who really cares about that story of a common mwananchi who can't even raise school fees, who has to think about, where do I get money for textbooks? Where do I get money for uniform? In literally 10 days, it's that power of, telling my story, that during the COVID-19, people were rules and regulations and measures being backed out every single day. Oh, wash your hands. But where I come from, we do not have water, literally we do not have water, So when you say that there's this money we've disbursed, 10 billion shillings to go to the vulnerable, and I know 20 households next to me, and I'm asking, umepata hii pesa ya watu vulnerable, and nobody in that circle has received that money for the vulnerable, and nobody, and not even the media houses, will tell the stories from Wanjiko's perspective. Nobody is asking the correct questions, and they've gone that step. They've gone that step ahead to actually even own, all these media stations. So it is them who actually set the agenda. It is them who set the narrative. So my story will never matter. So it is other people telling, my story. Me having to not know what my kids will eat at the end of the day, and someone literally taking my struggle and making it a narrative for their political, milestones. So there's power in telling our stories, because it is only when we tell our stories that we understand. And I like what we were able to do with the social justice movement, because the whole point about the social justice movement coming together was me coming from Githurai, thinking that, oh, me, in my area, our biggest problem is police brutality, is the
Did we lose Jockey?
criminalization of youth. Then I go to apologies. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Keep going, Jockey. You were talking about the strength of the social justice movement and what it brought together.
Yeah. So it's really about me hear the story of all this from the social justice.
Jockey, we'd lost you a bit. We'll come back to you when maybe at the end, so that you tell us the strength of the social justice movement. Abubakar, over to you. What is a Kenyan reality story justice that is close to your heart? And then this very big question on the role of the power of storytelling in justice and Madaraka interplay. I know that could have been one session all by itself.
So I have very many stories. We always talk about many stories, but I'll give you two. One is simple. Dr. Mshai talked about the last week's story on Hari Thuku in a national newspaper, and how when Hari Thuku came out of detention, he was a very rich man. So people were wondering, when you go detention in Shamba ya Babu, and what was going on in detention that you came out very rich? Should everybody be detained so that they can come out rich? But basically they were saying to him that you sold us out. But even after knowing that Hari Thuku sold out people, we still have a Hari Thuku Road, and we don't have a Nyanjiru or Ali Tairara. In that story, they introduce a new character called Ali Tairara. So everybody needs to find out who was Ali Tairara in this old struggle for independence. How come we've never heard of it? But one of the one I normally look at continuously is Abdul Latif Abdallah. Abdul Latif Abdallah, you can argue that he was the first political prisoner after independence. But Abdul Latif Abdallah's story is an amazing story, because he stood up when many older people were unwilling to stand up. When Kenya started going wrong, he started a circle of people to study what was going on wrong, of young people. Abdul Latif Abdallah was in his early 20s at that time. And he started challenging the state and saying, where are we going? We are taking the wrong turn. He was arrested. He was jailed. You don't hear the story of Abdul Latif Abdallah. You never study it in school. during his incarceration, like many others who come after him, he will use toilet paper to write poetry. And this before Ngugi and others. When he came out, he published his anthology of poetry called Sauti ya Dhiki. But he was not just despairing and giving up. He was contributing to the struggle. He was re-educating people. He was re-inspiring people. He was challenging status quo. And lo and behold, his anthology won the so-called Jomo Kenyatta Prize for Literature. When he was informed that you have won the Jomo Kenyatta Prize of Literature, he laughed. But suddenly he realized that now he'll be required to come to Nairobi from Mombasa and meet Mzee Jomo Kenyatta and be given the prize. And he thought this is a trick to incarcerate me more. And he was one of the first, again, people who went into exile because of his political beliefs. But if you look at the life of Abdul Latif Abdallah, there are many lessons. One, he's a self-taught scholar. Although he will never accept that title of professor, he's comfortable with Mwalimu, but he's a self-taught scholar. And many revolutionaries spend time to re-educate themselves because we have not deconstructed our education. He has continued the struggle in the country and outside the country and working with others who are involved in setting up Pambana and other liberation movements. But he's an old man now, but he's still in the struggle. What is the lesson there? This episodic participation in resistance and in struggle does not work. This is a lifelong calling. If you walk this path, you must commit yourself to say, I'm going to try and dismantle these structures and work towards a better Kenya for all of us. So let me finish with this lesson. One, and this is what we do in Orature Collective, we seek to deconstruct the past. And in seeking to deconstruct the past so that we can learn from that past. But we also seek to create the future for ourselves. Participating in creating the future for ourselves, but also managing the transition between the past and the future. And this cannot stop until all of us are free, until every person is free. So you say this is a long struggle that you cannot say you are tired of, and you say the future is what it will make ourselves. And to talk about what Dr. Mshai talked about, Fanon, one of my greatest lessons from the principles Shai was referring to, and she also mentioned this. So what happens when the generation betrays this mission? It means the other generations will still have to carry that burden.
Yeah.
That's what it means. So that's why I'm saying that it's cyclic in nature, but it is those who think that there's a time to stop and say, I'm going to rest, or let others also do their bidding. That is the wrong approach to do. And you say, I will always work for the common dignity of all the people, freedom for all the people, and deconstructing an oppressive system, an unjust system that takes away from people, continues to marginalize people, and continue to wage war and violence on the people. And I want to believe a better future for all of us is possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Zain. Shai.
Wow, thank you, both of you guys. You've really given me a lot to think about. And what I want to do, Carol, let me come to it by first answering your first question, and then I'm going to link it to my injustice. And I'm saying this because I was thinking about when you told us you want to talk about the story of Kenya. What came to mind is there's a cultural theorist called Stuart Hill, who has talked about 5 elements to the story of a nation. I'm not going to go through all of them. I want to focus on two, but just quickly, the first one is a national narrative, which is a set of stories that people, associate the nation with. The second is a national character whose essentials are defined as unchanging. When people say Kenyan, they think about that. The third are your invented symbols and traditions that are emblematic. So your flag, your coat of arms, those kind of things. Now, the two I want to really think about is one is the foundational myth of that nation that serves as the definitive story of the evolution of the nation. And I was smiling because you asked us, tell us the story of Kenya. And, I'm nervous because depending on who is telling it, right, they'll come at it from a different perspective. So you have the official history. And what is key about that is who is talked about in that history and who is not, as my brother has just given us an example of. And then the fifth one is a particular constitution of special, constituency of special people who uniquely belong to that nation and who above all else have the right to the custodianship of the nation. And for me, that's where our problem in Kenya is, how we define who those people are, because those are the people whose stories we center in the foundational myth of the nation. It is them we center when we think about who in the national narrative, what are the things we think about when we think about Kenya? So the injustice that is close to my heart goes back to those colonial era hierarchies. And the way I think Abaka talked about, we had a colony, which is where the settlers were and all its interests were around the settlers. Then we had those guys in Northern Territory whose only job was to keep the Italians coming down upon us. And then those protectorate, those guys at the coast, the coastal strip, Mwambao wa Pwani. And I think for me, it is the fact that when you're in the center, when you're in those inherited colonial, settler colony, the inherited spaces, especially places like Nairobi, it's very easy to forget about everybody else. It's very easy to remember that there was fighting in Marsabit. And every so often, I sit on a board with Sheikh Abdi, and he will tell us there's fighting in Marsabit. And it's like the rest of Kenya does not even think about it. We don't know it, we don't care. Ika Langalei was tweeting about, fighting and, people die in Turkana this month. And it's like most Kenyans have no idea that there are Kenyans who are dying and we are completely indifferent to it. If the same number or that kind of fighting was in the spaces where we live, like Nairobi, Mombasa, the cities, or even in some of our counties, we would stop to be able to pay attention to it. I will never forget conducting research into the post-election violence. And we went, my team went, it was after 2007, 2008, it was in 2008, we were sent to different counties all over Kenya. We collected the evidence, this was for the Interreligious Forum. We came and we gave our report to religious leaders from all over Kenya of different faith communities. I will never forget the person who stood up from Northern Kenya and he said, it is good this has happened. It is not good that Kenyans have died, but it is good that Kenyans are acknowledging that it is not right for other Kenyans to be killed because of who they are in terms of their identity. It is good that Kenyans are shaken by the fact that you can be burnt out of your house, women can be raped, all these things, people can be displaced in their own country by their fellow Kenyans and say that this is something that everybody should be outraged. I've never forgotten that. So that for me, that's the indignity. In 2013, Society of International Development took out a small video that's called The Story of a Gem, 2013. And in it, it's a small cartoon of a little girl, and she starts to reel out the statistics and she says things like, as I grow up, it means that my life means I will be 2 times poorer than the average Kenyan. The probability of me going to school, I looked it up before I came on, is 15 times less. The probability of me getting employed is 15 times less than the average Kenyan. It is, and she keeps giving the statistics of me getting a primary education, 17 times less than the average Kenyan. Going to secondary school, 33 times less than an average Kenyan. And in the end, she said something like, the chances of me being having electricity in my house is non-existent. That's the Kenya we live in. Yesterday, I was told about a gentleman who is our neighbor who was killed by a buffalo. Asal, we don't think about Asal usually because, you know, these arid and semi-arid lands. This is a man not in a national park who is conducting his livelihood. He's called Robert Ahmed. Robert Ahmed was killed by a buffalo because Kenyans do not care enough to make sure that those Kenyans who live beside national parks are secure in conducting their livelihoods. That is something that breaks my heart. And I'll finish with this example. I remember in 2015, Tekla Lorupe talking about a place called Nadome. People came from outside the country, attacked Kenyans. When the police went to look, the police turned back and said, we couldn't find those Kenyans. We couldn't find it. In fact, this story has been made up. A group of Pokot people went, led by Tekla, and they said, these are our people. They went and that community. Kenyans could not find them. The Pokot found them. But they found them not just because they were fellow Pokot, but because they were fellow Kenyans and they cared enough to do it. That's the injustice that breaks my heart.
Questions that come and I don't know. Thank you, Dr. Mshai. And I don't know if we have time to go through them because we are out of time. But I want to, Simon Peter asked if what happened in 1963 was betrayal, we must ask when will justice be served for Dedan Kimathi and other freedom fighters that the empire was so afraid of. He also asked if we were colonized for a little bit longer, would we have been in a better position as a country? And then Charles asks, is the baton to the next generation given or taken? To Dr. Mshai, talk to the intergenerational handover. As we are winding up, if you're able to answer any of those questions, the questions are in our chats, you can do so. But I want us to dream. I want us to dream and as you're giving your closing comments. 58 years from now, where is Kenya? Joki, we start with you.
Thank you, and sorry that I dropped off. I was tethering with my phone and someone was trying to call me. So, but really, what I was trying to say is one of the unique things that the social justice movement was able to do was really bringing people who are going through the same thing in the same space, so that I from Gedurai, when I meet someone from Kuru, when I meet someone from Madare, when I meet someone from Dandora, our story, and we're telling our stories, we are sharing our realities and experiences, we realize that we actually have a common enemy that we need to organize against. That it is not about me organizing against the Luo or the other tribes, but really against the status quo and the oppressors, So the power of the story is that it really brings out the characters, and you're able to tell who's the oppressed and who's the oppressor. It is really interesting when I listen to Shai and Abubakar speak, and as I speak from my angle, from the oppression that we experience, and the criminalization of the youth in our areas. And Mushai speaks of the marginalized and the stories, and our unique different stories must come to a place where they're woven together, even as we're speaking of a nation. We're not a nation right now, we're a country. So how do we even transition from being a country to a nation, where it's not about roads, it's not about skyscrapers, it's not about rail, it's about people, it's about the quality of life that they live, it's about dignity, it's about the oneness, So even as I dream of Kenya and the role that my generation needs to play, is first of all, the saddest part is the things that we're talking about right now, I had to learn after. You get out from formal education and you have to unlearn so many things so that you can now learn your true history. So the very first step is, first of all, teaching our children the correct history, because our history has been really distorted. It's it's written to celebrate the villains, and like we said, Mama was just was existed as as an illegal group until just recently. So who's telling our story? What stories are we telling our children? What seed are we planting in them for them to be patriotic enough to fight for the country, to build the nation that we all aspire for? I dream of a country where there's equity. I dream of a country where I will walk in the ghettos and not be afraid of meeting a policeman. I dream of a country where I will not be criminalized for being poor, that my story will matter, as a youth coming from the ghettos. I dream of a day where the will of the people is actually respected. People talk about elections, but where we are right now, we don't even have elections, we have selections. The leaders that we have are actually chosen in boardrooms, and we're just pawns in this whole game. So I really, when I dream of a country that is so entrenched in national values, that is so entrenched in constitutionalism, that no particular cabal of people can come and overturn the will of the people.
Thank you, Njoki, and thank you so much for joining us today. Mr. Abubakar?
First of all, I think we need to take personal responsibility for our situation in the country. As Mishai was saying, that we must not think of externalizing the problems. Today's challenge is each and every one of us have to think and say, am I part of the oppressive system, or am I part of the system we're trying to build, which is just for everybody? The second question that one has to ask themselves is, am I aiding and abetting the unjust system that exists in our country? And in this, I will challenge people and say, one of the most powerful tools in social change is understanding the power of your money. Each and every one of us spend money. You must think about how you spend that money. And when you spend it, does it add to the problems that we have in this country, or does it start helping us and shackle ourselves from this oppressive system? So that you can direct how your money can be spent, and you can direct, if during the struggle for independence and many struggles across the world, one of the most powerful tool is economic boycott. And economic boycott and social boycotts is directing your money to areas that are liberating and withholding your money from the oppressors of this world. And some of these people steal from us, and then they go and open a supermarket, and people are happy to go and spend money in that supermarket, not thinking that was money stolen from us that has built that supermarket. So personal responsibility, what Dr. Mshai was saying. But the third level is organizing. And I think this is very critical in terms of what Njoki has spoken about and Dr. Mshai. We need to organize together and bring together all efforts that are trying to transform Kenyans. One of the biggest challenges we have today is that our struggles are in different areas and excluded from each other. So you do not see your struggle is connected to the small scale farmer. thinking of how to get produce to the market and giving to people a value that people pay back fair prices for their sweat and their effort. So we need to bring all the struggles together, a way of coordination. So that calls for two things: mobilizing better and organizing better. And let me finish with two things. The brother who is asking, I think it's just frustration. He's asking, should we have allowed colonialism a little longer? Yeah. Absolutely not. That is the assumption that colonialism was civilizing us. No, colonialism was terrible. It was oppressive and violent. And any extra day of colonialism meant harm to our people. So I know it's frustration, but we can organize better, we can mobilize better. And I believe that the future belongs to us. It doesn't belong to the oppressors, because the majority of this country feel oppressed. Majority of the people, it's only a small clique of people who are privileged, that are happy with the system that we have. And let me finish with this thought. Every research, social research that has been done, majority of Kenyans saying that Kenya is in the wrong direction. Kenya is following the wrong path. Kenya needs to change direction. So we know that those who are oppressed, we are the majority of the people, and we can do something about our own lives. And the future is bright. Thank you very much.
Asante, Abubakar. Dr. Mshai?
So when you talk about what's going to happen 58 years from now, you know, I should also own that identity that Abubakar talked about, which is that of a storyteller. And when I work with stories, which is what sometimes we do, is I sometimes work with scenarios. In fact, we're working on one right now on Nairobi. And one of the things that storytelling teaches us, and the scenarios process teaches us, is that you can never tell, you know, it's not clear. You know, this thing of we say vision 2030, and it's like we know for sure we will be there by 2030. That life does not happen like that. And you know, that we could end up in 4, 5, 6 different, there are so many possibilities. What for me is key is what the people of Kenya choose to do between now and those 58 years. And going back to what I said before about when Stuart talked about the narrative, the nation, who the people are, and what they choose and who they choose to commit to is what is going to be critical. So for me, it depends on whether we choose to be a nation that sees the entirety of the nation and commits to making that nation work. In other words, do we choose in the next 60 years to turn that document we have, that legal document we call the Constitution of Kenya, which we worked so hard to get, a constitution by us, for us, and not the one that was given to us by the British? Do we choose to make it our lived reality, or do we choose just for it to become lip service? Do we choose to allow impunity to reign, or do we choose to make constitutionalism our reality? Not because that constitution is perfect, don't get me wrong, but because we have a covenant. And because we are people of faith, I want us to take us back that if you go to that constitution, the first thing that it does in the preamble is it says, we the people of Kenya, and it goes to God, right? It takes us back to that place of we are people of faith. We are people who believe in a divine power. And then it takes us in, when you come into the Constitution, Article 1, sovereignty of the people, that we have the right, the responsibility, and the choice to make the decisions and to live them out and to create a country that will be that dream country that is envisioned in the Constitution. So what will Kenya look like? I hope it will look like the Kenya that's described in the Constitution of Kenya 2010. Is it going to happen? Only we can decide that. So that even when we think about something like the national anthem and we start with, O God of all creation, or E Mungu nguvu yetu, the end of that first stanza says, that we want to live in a particular country, a country of justice, a country where there's prosperity, a country with all these good things. That's the vision we have. But let's not forget that stanza 2 and 3 tells us, all of us, wake up, arise, do your part. I hope we will be a country that has done its part 60 years from now, so that the children of the next century will say, kila kitu, we've got our own challenges, but these guys did what they were supposed to do in the time they were supposed to do it.
Wow, such a rich conversation today. Thank you so very much. There's so many questions. Some of them we will answer as we end, because we are 15 minutes over time. But I want to pour my gratitudes to you, my beloved friends, comrades, and who served as panelists today. I am a student. I am honored to learn from movements, from Jockey and the social justice movement. I think for me, the concept of connecting our struggles and also localizing our struggles and telling our struggles and being the people to present the struggle ourselves, personalizing and making it our own struggle. That's what I've learned the past 2-3 years that I've been involved with the social justice movement. And from Shai and Abu Bakr, just the beauty of story, the beauty of dreaming, the beauty of knowing our history, and knowing and giving me and a lot of other friends who we've been able to do this with the capacity to dream and imagine. And it's harder than you think, but also that it's possible to do so. As there will be a few questions and answers that we might go back to the chat and answer, but I want to finish this conversation with a quote from Steve Biko, the great Steve Biko, who said, "We have set out on a quest for true humanity, and somewhere on the distant horizon, we can see the glittering prize. Let us march forth with courage and determination, drawing strength from our common plight and our brotherhood and sisterhood. In time, we shall be in a position to bestow upon he speaks of South Africa, but I want to contextualize it to Kenya. In time, we shall be able we shall be in a position to bestow upon Kenya the greatest gift possible, a more human face." And so if after all is said and done, that Kenya 58 years from now is that we are human, I think we will have done all we have to do. So thank you so very much. I will end our Facebook Live here, but my panelists, msiende kwanza.